Welcome back to Close Up. You can name just about any piece of consequential legislation that has passed at the State House in the last decade plus, and chances are Senate President Jeb Bradley's name is on the bill, and if his name isn't on it, then his legislative fingerprints certainly are. He's retiring at the end of this term, and that means the State House will be in need of not just a new Senate President, but also an official deal-maker in chief. Senator Bradley is our guest this morning on Close Up. Thank you for being here, Senator.
Yeah, good morning, Adam. Thank you.
So for starters, what made you decide that this is it?
You know what, it was just time, family considerations. I just need to be able to spend more time with my kids and grandkids and, you know, Karen too. And I think that was it, just time.
Yeah. You've been at the State House over a 30-year span with a stint in Congress there, 2 terms in the 2000s, and you haven't been shy about describing, you know, the dysfunction in Washington and how you don't ever want to see that come to Concord and the State House. But do you see a little bit more of the hyper-partisanship, Washington style, kind of creeping in a little bit at the State House?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that it's coming into New Hampshire too. I think it's more reflective in the New Hampshire House, where there are 400 members, and so you have people from all walks of the political spectrum in the House. But in the Senate, there are only 24 of us, and so we're really not much more than glorified volunteers with a fancy license plate. And I think because of that, there's a lot more mutual respect, and we don't snipe at each other as much. And it does allow for people to work together. And that doesn't mean we always agree. That's not the case. But it makes it easier to come to an agreement when the opportunity is there. And I think the fact that we only get $100 a year is a good thing, because people are there that want to be there, and that helps engender the self-respect and respect of others.
Right, and that trend in the House, you know, the House is in some ways the pipeline for the Senate over the years, and, you know, you were a major architect of the Medicaid expansion deal to get that through and bring it along in a bipartisan way. You know, when you look at who's going to succeed you in leadership, I'm not talking about right away, maybe a decade down the road, you know, philosophically, a lot of those folks are opposed, not necessarily on the numbers, but just on the idea of using any kind of federal help for health care. So you fought that battle successfully over the last decade, but what happens when no one in your party wants to do that?
Well, I think, you know, if you just look at Medicaid expansion, it's become institutionalized, and people have constituents that have benefited from it, and it's helped people with their health care. It's definitely saved lives, and so it was a process to bring the kind of bipartisan consensus behind Medicaid expansion that happened over 4 different authorizations for it. And to get a 24-0 vote in the Senate shows the hard work of all the advocacy groups, but also the people, thousands of people, quite frankly, that have benefited from it. They've contacted senators, they've let them know how they've benefited, and I think that translated into a 24-0 vote.
Yeah. Compromise has been so hard to come by at the State House over the last decade that literally it started to be named after you. There's this term, the quote-unquote Bradley Special. I've heard anecdotally that this was not something that was brought up in front of you very often, and when it was, you weren't happy about it when it started.
Well, you know, it's kind of funny, really. The way it works is everybody comes to the table, you sit around the table, everybody has to give and take. Nobody leaves getting everything they want, and everybody's slightly upset, or maybe more than slightly upset, but a deal gets done. And that's what good public policy is. Nobody has a monopoly on good ideas, and we should listen more than we talk, and that's what helps bring people together. Yeah, nobody gets everything they want.
I was going to say, if I had $1 for every time you said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, I would have quite a bonus, I would think. But part of what has made you a deal maker is your knack for developing legislative language and finding the right words to get a deal done. Now you have colleagues who are, you know, words have become a big deal now, right? Where it's like, you know, the term illegal alien, you have colleagues who are saying now this is offensive, even though it's a term that's been used for decades, and then it's a legal term at the federal level. You know, your colleague Senator Whitley is telling, you know, your colleagues it's offensive and dehumanizing to say illegal alien. The implication for that being, if you continue using that word, you're a bigot. What do you think about that?
So look, I like Senator Whitley. I've worked with Senator Whitley. She's very honest, hardworking, but I disagree with her. And so you can disagree with people. You don't have to be disagreeable to disagree. I respect that she thinks differently than I do. Illegal alien is the term that is referred to with people coming into this country illegally. That's federal law. So I get that some people don't like it, but call it what it is.
We mentioned the Bradley special here. Do you have any appetite for one last big deal, potentially? You've got this cannabis legalization issue that's out there. You're opposed. You've wanted to change the bail law that passed in 2018 for some time. Is there a possibility to somehow tie these two things together to find common ground on both issues?
Well, I think that marijuana's going to rise or fall on its own merits. I think there are significant problems with legalizing marijuana, health problems, mental health problems that are increasingly becoming documented. I don't think any state should invite the black market into their state for marijuana, and that's what will happen. And look, I say that as somebody that was the architect of the compromise to decriminalize marijuana, but sometimes a step too far is a step too far, and that's what I think marijuana is. Bail we have to fix, and Adam, I think we have a good shot at getting that done.
When it comes to marijuana legalization, though, are you saying essentially you don't want to see that get out of the Senate, period?
I don't want to see it get out of the Senate, period. But I've also said that if there are 13 votes for it, I'm going to try to make it the most user-friendly for New Hampshire. So keeping the black market out, making sure the regulatory process is tight, making sure that there is a THC limit on the products that can be sold, and making sure that big marijuana, you know, the same as big tobacco, is not dominating the politics of the State House. To me, that's really important if it's going to pass.
Sticking with the Senate Judiciary Committee here, they just slapped an expedient to legislate on a House bill that would have enabled the state to report when involuntary commitments for mental health are done, to import that to the federal gun background check system. On a party line vote, this was given an ITL, as we just mentioned, but the bill was inspired by the shooting of former police chief Bradley Haas, who was a security guard at New Hampshire Hospital, killed in a shooting there last November. Do you oppose this bill as well?
Yeah, I do. I think that if it was just reporting for somebody that had been adjudicated with a mental health issue and there was a crystal clear opportunity for that person to get their Second Amendment rights back when the mental health issue had been resolved, it would look a lot different. But I think it morphed into something more than it should have been, and that's the problem. So I'm sure that people are going to next year try to do it more, a lot more in a strict basis for a mental health adjudication with restoration of rights, and I think that would be something that would work.
Do you think, though, I mean, because this is New Hampshire is one of only a few states that doesn't report this information, and the proponents of the bill have said, hey, these aren't people who are just experiencing mental health problems. These are people who are essentially, a judge has said, you are so mentally ill that we need to take your rights away and put you into an institution. The idea that someone like that should have guns, I think most people would say, well, why the heck is that possible?
And again, I think if it was that strict, that it had been adjudicated and somebody gets their rights back if the problem has resolved itself, looks a lot different than House Bill 1711.
Very big debate this year on several bills dealing with the idea of trans youth in sports. And you were talking about this on the Senate floor just a few weeks back, essentially referencing this incident in Massachusetts in which a trans girl who had physically developed with the benefit of testosterone was in a basketball game and essentially ragdolling these girls, injuring three of them. The game had to be postponed because the other team decided to forfeit. I think clearly a lot of people see that and they see that there's a problem. However, there are trans girls who play who are not physically dominant and who would not alter the competitive aspect of the game. Why pass a law that would prevent them from participating in sports?
So, look, I think, you know, women have a right to being on a women's only team because of the difference in speed, strength, agility, all of those things. And I think that is increasingly becoming documented that it's an issue. The other part of the bill, and I think even more important, is women have a right of privacy in their locker rooms. So I think everybody should get the same rights, but there shouldn't be enhanced rights for some, diminishing the rights of others in the process.
And yet, what about the non-physically dominant trans girls, though, I guess? The ones who would not alter the competitive outcome or injure someone?
But I think there is a difference in biology. And you know, as my colleagues always want to remind me, follow the science. Well, biology is science.
As we wrap up, one last quick question here. Do you have a position on this medical aid in dying bill? This is one that crosses party lines, a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives on assisted
So
suicide.
I'm not going to vote for it. I think that the sponsor of the bill did try to craft it in a narrow way, but the fear is that because a lot of people would not be able to utilize the right to die if they couldn't actually physically take the pills, it's just going to expand. And the more it expands, then I think the more problematic it becomes. So to me, it's like, I just can't go there at this point in time. I think we have very good palliative and hospice care to relieve people's pain and suffering at the end of life. I've been through it with family members, so I've seen it, and I think that is a much better outcome.
All right, Senate President Jed Bradley, thanks for joining us. I think we will see you at least one more time before you
I hope
ride off
so.
into the sunset.
All right,
thanks
thank
again.
you.
Appreciate it. And